The world feels a bit toxic and blah these days, doesn't it? The same old people coming up with the same old solutions for big problems that still don't work. We need to change the game. Well, welcome to Women Advancing. Join me, host Kate Byrne, in this dynamic bi-weekly podcast, bringing together female founders, funders, and thought leaders. Listen to the people driving change, how they got there, how you can help, and yep, how you might just be the next one to advance. Proof that all ships rise with women at the helm. That's what happens when Women Advance with Kate Byrne.
Hi, everyone. It's Kate Byrne, your host. Diversity. I want to think about that word because for far too often, we only think of its importance in the workplace. And frankly, we're not going to even be able to think about it there very shortly, and perhaps in a financial portfolio. But it's truly crucial to a thriving climate as well. As the recent floods, fires, earthquakes, and tornadoes reflect, we're in a dire state of imbalance. We're not doing a great job. In my conversation with Terry Slavin, who's the editor-in-chief at Reuters Events Sustainable Business, we dive into the intersection of climate leadership, diversity, and the power of storytelling, and the women sharing those stories. As a driving force behind Trailblazing Women in Climate, which is now in its third year, Terry has spotlighted the impressive list of female leaders reshaping sustainability, such as former president of Ireland and co-founder of the Dandelion Project, and others representing voices from nearly every continent. We discuss the recent findings in their diversity inclusion issue that reveals why inclusion isn't just a moral imperative, but a strategic one. We explore why women are leading the charge in climate action, what's holding them back, the role of media in shifting narratives around sustainability and inclusion, and finally, what we all can do to have our own impact in supporting nature. If you care about the future of our planet and the people shaping it, this is the conversation. It's a must listen. You'll learn a tremendous amount. We're so fortunate today to talk to a voice who is highlighting and showcasing world-changing, trailblazing women. We want to welcome to Women Advancing, Terry Slavin, the editor-in-chief at Reuters Events Sustainable Business. Terry, welcome to Women Advancing.
Thank you so much, Kate. So well timed. You're approaching me about appearing on your podcast.
Yeah, I mean, times, be it climate challenges, at least certainly in my country, with regards to the notion of diversity and inclusion. And I'm really excited to dig into all of that. Let's start a little bit about, I know you've got this Trailblazing Women in Climate list, which you've just, give us a history of that. And if you feel comfortable sharing maybe a few of the folks who are on it.
Yeah, sure. We've been doing it for 3 years now. I came up with the idea a couple of years ago and it was 25. So for the first one was 25. It was a list of 25 trailblazing women. I thought I had a pretty exhaustive, and I wanted to highlight women who were working across the climate space. So not just the big policymakers, but also the corporates, the entrepreneurs, the activists as well. And that's what we've done. We've tried to balance it between those 4 groups. It's a huge, huge challenge, and it does take people working on it from all different areas. The collaborative nature of climate and biodiversity nature, the two of those big challenges, and the social challenges as well. It was such a good idea that they would also do it, each of the sectors that Reuters Events does. Even though we're a sustainable business, this is very much focused on that slice of sustainable business, which is climate. And for this year, we've decided to go to 12 people, and rather just name people, I got in touch with every single one of them and asked them to give their bios and also to give their thoughts on some of the most pressing challenges faced by women, faced by everyone as a community in terms of climate change, what gives them hope in terms of the future, especially given the challenges we now have. So yeah, it's really inspirational because I think there's so much bad news. Things seem to be going backwards so quickly, and you really need to look at what's positive, where progress is. I think women are very much at the forefront of that.
Yeah, it's interesting, that point about focusing on positivity in such seemingly very dark and frankly, ever shifting sands times. I had worked with George Lucas Education Foundation. That was what we had strove to do with Edutopia, really focusing on the positive things that were taking place in education, because it's so quick, it's so easy to slip into negativity, and then that results in apathy, and then it just increases and speeds up the backward spiral. So with these women, how do you go about selecting them or choosing them? Do people nominate them? Is it you scouring?
It's a little bit of nomination. I mean, yeah. I just put my head together I sent out emails to colleagues in Reuters News, to the journalists who write for me, to the conference organizers of our events, asking them to suggest people. A lot of them are people I've just known very well. I've been watching them over years, and I put them forward on my own behalf. But it's become slightly more formalized this year. It's unlike, say, other awards where it's very much people putting forward applications. And we're doing this completely on merit and on the basis of, a lot of it is from the journalists who've been covering this for years as well. So one of the people I was keen to see, who has somehow eluded the last two lists. So you may know she's the former president of Ireland. She's a member of the Elders, the B Team. And she's also a co-founder of a new initiative. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Yep.
Yeah, women to push away, particularly on the fossil fuel subsidies. And It has, with all her other work, because she was formerly UN High Commissioner for Refugees and Human Rights, with climate justice at its core. And on the hope front, she talks about dandelions as being, they're not a very pretty plant. People see them as weeds. They want to get rid of them. But in fact, they're incredibly tenacious, and they're incredibly important in biodiversity terms as well. And they grow in the most surprising places. Or unsurprising places. They grow everywhere. So anyway, that's why I wanted to feature her, who is Under Secretary General of the UN. She's been working for more than 30 years in development economics and environmental sustainability. She has been, I don't think I've seen her featured in too many of these kind of lists. The largest multilateral climate fund, and overseeing nearly $15 billion in investment across 130 countries. So formerly, she was CEO of Climate Investment Funds, which was a very major funder under her direction for the Just Energy Transition Partnerships. Again, those are partnerships with countries to get away from fossil fuels. Now, that's going to be the impact of what's happened with the evisceration of USAID. That is going to be dramatic. So it's really important to have a very strong person at the helm, which Mafalda is. I don't know if I've pronounced her name correctly, but she's from the Center for International Forest Research and World Agroforestry, and that's a very critical partner working in the developing world on nature and biodiversity. And she's originally from Rwanda. And another is she's CEO of the Solar Energy Industries Association. And her advocacy was instrumental in passing the Inflation Reduction Act. And she's also been a leading voice for the inclusion and advancement of women in the solar industry. So that's networking events trying to connect women in the clean power place. So those are just some of the women that are on our list this year.
That's an extraordinarily impressive list. Plus, what I also love is the breadth of subject matter expertise, and also the number of continents represented.
Yeah, we've also got the co-founder of India's largest renewable energy company, Renew, and it generates 10% of the nation's wind power and energy power. So she's a really important player too. I mean, in her comments, she said that, for emerging markets, this could be what's happening in the US could actually be a strong opportunity for countries like India to position themselves as alternative manufacturing hubs. So, and then you strengthen domestic supply chains, invest in critical minerals, and accelerate what's happening in India, which has been very impressive on on renewable energy. And of course, you hear a lot about China, but also there's been a lot happening in India as well.
Which is fantastic. Now more than ever, you're right. The notion of Project Dandelion couldn't be more perfectly timed, because I just envision all these little seeds and pods of these different groups of dandelions taking it up, and it becomes very grassroots, which, let's face it, we women pretty much are the queens of that. That's right. There's this instinctive understanding of systems thinking and connectivity, mycelium, if you will.
Yes, and that's why women's leadership is so important. And in fact, in the climate space, unlike, as I said, some of the other sectors that Reuters Events covers, they also have Trailblazing Women lists as well, but they have a lot of difficulty getting women in some sectors. It's not very hard in sustainability to do that. In fact, I think about a half of sustainability professionals are women. So there's real gender representation there. But women who are working on this issue, who aren't just in the sustainability roles, who are actually founders and CEOs and entrepreneurs, they have a lot more difficulty. And there's a lot of, I think it's about 12%. Let me see so in the energy sector, women have fewer than 12% of leadership roles, compared to 15%, 0.5% in non-energy firms. And in the renewable energy space, it's only 10.8%. So,
which is horrific. And then when you think of the female founders, the numbers that are getting funding from VCs and such, you lay that on top, which is less than 2%. You add race to that.
Yes.
Under 1%. I mean, it's abysmal. And I think some of the changes that are taking place, and we'll get into that in a second, with regards to diversity and inclusion agendas being essentially abolished. We'll get into that in a minute. But I wanted to ask, and thank the Lord that there are those women that are kind of getting out ahead and really making changes. What is it, do you think, that women bring to, say, leadership in a climate and sustainability space that is different to men? Or is that even a fair question?
Well, I think you answered it earlier, Kate, in the sense that it's about being able to be able to systems think, to be collaborative as well, to reach out across your silos to the whole ecosystem that's involved. So that's why they're also concerned more with issues of equity,
right,
and justice, social companies that are involved on the social sphere. And we've seen that. In fact, one of the articles is written by a professor who's done specific research on why women are getting so little part of that funding and the impact it has as well. But she said there's this narrative that women just are not very confident. They don't know how to network. They're not good at pushing themselves. She interviewed 100 entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, and she said the ones, a lot of them have been very, successful. They've managed to go on and found their own companies. It's not through lack of networks or confidence. What they need is the funding. And she actually also did a deep dive into one of the angel VC companies, talking to both men and women. And she said it's that gender issue was there. So there are many, many more men in VC. I don't know what the statistic is. And there is unconscious and conscious bias.
Very much so.
And the companies that they are funding are technology companies and, AI companies, and they're very much, and you talk about, all those tech bros, but women are more concerned about founding companies that are addressing social, holistic challenges.
Right. I think of female leaders as instinctively being more triple bottom line or even quadruple bottom line thinkers, just for no other reason other than it just frankly makes sense. Because if you take care of the planet, which is your resources, you're actually taking care of your customers, your people, and then that'll result in profit because everyone will not only thrive, but they'll just period live. I've never understood. I've always had an issue. Never understood why people had such a problem with that. And I
Yeah.
think there's going to be some shifts taking place. So I want to shift a little bit now into the diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
I know you've just recently published an issue of a magazine devoted to this. Tell us a little bit about some of your findings. And
one of the findings is, yes, we've heard a lot about what some of Trump's executive orders are going to mean in terms of representation in companies, boards. I mean, are targeted immediately at the private sector, though they are targeted at government contractors, of which there's a huge amount, all the big companies are government contractors. But over the past year, there has been, ever since 2023, in fact, a Supreme Court ruling against affirmative action in terms of at colleges. There's been a campaign in particular, spearheaded by 13 attorneys general of Republican states, just threatening legal action. I was aware of this on the climate front before this, but it was clear that they're also on the diversity and inclusion front, even more so. And so companies had already been, stepping back. Some of them were being very hurt in the courts. They're being sued in the courts, sued by shareholders. And that's, in a way, it's understandable how companies are, trying to mediate that risk.
right.
So some of the companies that have pulled back, trying to just change the wording rather than dropping the wording, rather than making fundamental changes to their programs.
Right.
In some cases. But I mean, even McDonald's, which is an example, it's now got its global inclusion team rather than a global diversity team. But it's ended, representation goals on its board, etc. So, and I think a lot of the big banks have also done that. I think there's a lot of companies that have rode back on that. So that's going to have a huge impact. However, some of the Reuters News have been really covering this very, very well. And they've been doing research and saying that a lot of these companies that have dropped them were not doing very well against their targets anyway. And they came in 2020 after the George Floyd was killed and the Black Lives Matter. And some of them have just and it was the thing to do, was to jump on that bandwagon. So,
right. It was in vogue. I have to say, I was surprised and disappointed when, you think about McDonald's and you think about companies like Walmart, who one, have tremendous amount of real estate, and two, have some of the largest diversity employers.
Yeah.
And why I bring about the real estate is that means there's space within a neighborhood for these spaces to actually be hubs and community centers, if you will. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they end up navigating it. And sometimes it is wording, and there are workarounds. I know, for instance, in the education sector, there's a lot of this taking place right now and it's especially in the senior level. So in business schools, there's a huge concern from international students coming, if they wanted to come to the US or not, just because one, they may not be able to get back. There's no special funding. They can't afford it. So I think it'll really, I think we're going to end up feeling it sooner than we think. I think there's going to be that's going to be a shift. People are going to feel fat quickly, as opposed to gradually over time.
Well, I think, and the other component of this is the supplier diversity programs.
This one I wanted to ask you too.
Yeah. So some of those date back from the 60s. They're not from, a lot of companies did join the bandwagon, but the supplier diversity. So companies say we're going to spend a certain amount with non-majority,
right,
non-white,
right,
non-white male company.
Yes.
Yeah, and in a lot of the context, that's Black-owned businesses. And companies like Google, Apple, a lot of these companies that have since dropped away had pledged, who were spending at least $1 billion a year with non-diverse suppliers. And that is going to, and in a lot of cases, that is, and the people who are going to hurt most are especially Black women entrepreneurs. Another surprise to me as I looked into this was Black women are the fastest growing and biggest part of entrepreneurs in the US, possibly because that's the only way they have to start their own business. They don't have a choice because they have trouble getting other meaningful employment. But the failure rate is huge. And the access to capital is like half of even white women entrepreneurs are getting. So that's gonna really hurt. And when Target dropped its diversity, and it wasn't part of the $1 billion roundtable, but it was still spending that kind of money with suppliers. And when Walmart dropped out in November, and Target dropped out just after the election, or in January. Maybe it was just after the election. And then civil rights groups had said, let's boycott Target. But the Black women, some of the Black entrepreneurs were saying, no, don't, because we need that money. Don't boycott.
That's my platform. That's my channel right there.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out for companies to have diverse backgrounds, because that mirrors your company.
Yes.
I mean, your customer. So,
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Right? You get me, you see me, you understand my needs. When you're coming up with a new product, you have the features that actually I care about, as opposed to stupid nice to haves.
And I think there's definitely been research, and I think it was the Boston Consulting Group research on how companies that, I believe, with more diverse employees, especially in the management, executive level management, are able to come up with products that are more appealing.
Right.
People. And when women are CFOs, chief financial officers, that kind of where they're in that position, where they're at leadership, that they have much more power. The more power that they have, the more innovation you often get from companies.
Which I always think is interesting, because one would think that innovation is somewhat risky. You know what I mean? It's untried, that sort of thing. And yet that is the very thing that so often, to your earlier comment, a lot of people complain about females as investors, is that they're risk adverse. And I beg to differ. I think they do a lot of due diligence, but they actually are more willing to take a chance on something, and they are provide much more patient capital. But that's a little bit off topic. So I want to shift a little bit into like some hopefully potential positivity. And let's talk a little bit about trends in sustainable business. What are you excited about? I mean, are there hopeful glimmers of light out there in terms of shifts or promises?
Well, something I have been excited about has been the growing, those connections being made with climate and nature. And for example, you had the task force on climate-related financial disclosure, which has really changed the landscape in terms of financial reporting and has led a lot of what companies have done on climate. And then a couple of years ago, you had the launch of the task force on nature-related financial disclosure. And that's really, but nature provides 30% of, nature-based climate solutions are some 30% of the climate solutions that are out there. And you can't separate the two. A lot of companies thought that, and that you could just solve for climate, and then you could worry about nature and biodiversity. That was all in the too hard, too difficult box. But in fact, they need to happen at the same time. And you saw that even with Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP, which has led on this. They were very much about climate and weren't really focused looking at nature, but now that has shifted around a lot in the last couple of years.
See, to me, that's another one of those things that is like a duh. I mean, it starts to me with nature, doesn't it? I mean, that's where it all begins. So that's kind of the root, if you will, appropriately. But if that's the root, I don't see how anyone could decouple. Right? It's
to me, yes, that makes sense to me as well. And even Donald Trump in his first term had supported funding for tree planting. So that has very widespread appeal.
Yeah, well.
And the thing about nature is it's not only about climate mitigation because of absorbing all the CO2 and, what whales, how much values whales are and how the Amazon is absorbing CO2. But it's about adaptation, and that's the most critical issue, and that's finally getting talked about much more. The impact of planting trees in cities, for example. Mangroves, what the value that mangroves have, not only for capturing CO2, but for protecting against storm surges, etc. So that the fact that funding is going because it plays those two roles. And given where we are with climate now, and almost every month brings new very negative indications of how far off track we are, that we have to think about adaptation, and that's at the very same time as we're mitigating. And it's much more immediate. It affects people immediately.
So you've done such a great job. I mean, think about this. Within the last half an hour or so, we've talked about the fabulous work you're doing with, raising visibility of the people that are leading, the females that are leading the charge, and males too. I mean, just all the work.
Absolutely. All hands on deck.
Exactly. It takes a village, and there are a lot of people in there. So with that and really advocating for change, how do you navigate that line between sort of journalism and content creation and then advocacy in your role?
Okay, I don't think of myself as an advocate.
Fair.
I mean, especially with Reuters on the news side, the importance of balance.
Exactly.
Yeah, and everything that we write, all the features that we write end up on Reuters.com. So we have to also have balance in our coverage. But I do see, to me, there's no question what's happening, with climate change is real. And I see our role as being a critical friend. So the very difficult thing has been and continues to be issues of greenwash. So companies jumping on that bandwagon. And there was this is quite a controversial topic, and that, carbon markets. So there has been a lot of greenwash and issues of integrity in carbon markets. I think that is now being addressed. There are still issues with carbon markets, but we just ran a column this week talking about, with USAID being eviscerated, that, carbon markets are a way to get some funding, especially for things like clean cook stoves, for example, which have a huge amount of social benefits as well as the climate benefits. And companies need to have, and carbon, and where you're doing, there's also been a lot of talk about insetting emissions in companies. So companies addressing in their own supply chains rather than just buying carbon credits as, to make up for a shortfall on what they're able to do in their own, in their own backyard.
Right.
But you need both, actually. You do need there to be credits with integrity that can help bring that finance to clean cook stoves, and the amount of health issues that are related to indoor cooking and women not having access to clean cooking, and the girls going to not able to go to school because they're having to go fetch firewood, all those issues that need to be addressed. We see ourselves as a critical friend, trying to identify best practice. Companies may not be perfect, but they are doing something that is worth, trying to highlight the companies that are setting best practice and not shying away from showing where companies are falling away from that.
It's more complicated. It's more complex. And it's not just a one-off, one-line sentence solution.
Yeah.
It goes back to where we started, systems.
Mm-hmm.
This impacts this, impacts this. And so to think about things in a longer term vision and understanding all that has to take place to make this one change. Now more than ever, we really need, I believe, everyone to do their part. We can all do something. It really does start with us, with you, with me. What advice would you give to those who want to get in the climate space, and also to just folks in general, things that they could do to really make an impact?
I mean, I think in every community, there are so many things that people can do. They can, in their consumption patterns, they can feel that they are eating less meat. A lot of it, I think, on the food front, actually, food systems are hugely, hugely important for both nature and climate. And so much of deforestation is driven. I mean, you've heard it all before. People are aware of this about meat.
Yes.
So obviously, trying to eat less meat, public transport rather than, trying to do that. But also, really importantly, in people's pensions. And that's where so much of people aren't aware that in the money that they're saving, their retirement savings, that's all, in most cases, going to the fossil fuel economy, unless you've got or I guess tech is another place it goes. But so, to ask some questions about your pension provider and look for greener, more sustainable pension, and they are out there. But that's from a personal point of view, yes. But I also think especially for young people who are looking for, trying to find some hope. And I've got 3 children myself, and the kind of world they're growing up in, and to feel that you are doing something positive, that you are making a difference. That's really important to keep you going.
And I think you raise a really good point about younger people within companies.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important for those of you who find yourselves, surrounded by, let's face it, we've got 5 to 6 different generations in any given corporate setting. And
Yes.
many of them will not really think that, I'm always stunned. People still don't recycle. What? Anyway, but there are things that you can do in sort of groups that you can start within your own company that kind of shines a light on some of these different shifts that can take place from the company, and you can actually help your company diminish their carbon footprint, their consumption footprint, and all of that.
And you can also ask what your company is doing.
Correct.
If they've signed up for the Science-Based Targets Initiative or to net zero, what are they doing to actually?
Exactly. Right. And it doesn't even have to be on a because I think some folks may say, oh my gosh, is that a gotcha? It's not a gotcha at all. It's where are we? Where are we going? And then, let's face it, so many people, especially in technology companies, are very competitive. So inspire that competitive, energy. And it would be really interesting. I've always thought it'd be interesting if different regions had sort of a competition of who could, lower their carbon footprint, who has the greatest, decline in consumption overall, who has the greatest number of carpools. I mean, there are all sorts of things that we could actually do that would also serve as a gathering together of the community at large. And hopefully then maybe even have people understand really how the role we all play every single day.
I guess one of the things I've been surprised about is how few companies are really addressing business travel. A company like Microsoft has been offsetting, it's been investing in sustainable aviation fuels, substantial amount of money invested in sustainable aviation fuels. A lot of Microsoft's far from the only one. A lot of the tech companies have done so. But when it comes to their own business travel, ever since COVID, we all learned that we could work remotely, during COVID. But I mean, you don't have to stop traveling necessarily, but do you have to be in business class which has twice the carbon footprint of economy? And certainly do you need to be flying around on a company jet? So yes, one of my hobby horses.
I'm with you. So now I am going to ask, so what advice would you give yourself knowing what you know now?
Well, I think, and this is advice I try and remind myself still, but that people are just people, and outward appearances, people who can seem to be, there's a lot of marketing involved. People market themselves. And you have to not kind of measure yourself against them. You have to just have a feeling of, what you want to do. And I'm thinking of even when I was in high school and I was thinking about, I wanted to do journalism, but there was a boy above me who I really admired, but he was just such a character, very outgoing, very flashy. He said he was going to journalism school. And I thought, oh, if he's doing that, there's no way that I ended up taking another program at another university. And within that first year, I actually realized, oh, I think I could do it. And I changed university in the second year, got into journalism. I think he ended up dropping out of that program, the program that he did. And, but you just need to have some confidence in listening to yourself and not try and measure yourself against what you can see, what seems to be in other people. And I think especially now with what's happening in the world, and there's a lot of misinformation and deep fakes and all these things that you have to kind of set your own compass and be true to that.
So true. I think you have to have exactly the confidence piece. And they always say too, listen to your heart, because the heart sees what the eyes miss. So pay attention.
Yeah, and you can make mistakes, you can make the wrong choices, and you can be paralyzed too sometimes with indecision. But I think sometimes just, going with your gut, with what you think is the best route, and then just making the most of that, whatever you choose. You'll never know how it would have gone the other way around, but making the most of that and just putting your energies into that.
And focus on it. Well, Terry, thank you so much. Incredible insights. And also thank you so much. I feel there's so much I learned in this, which is fantastic. So everyone, I want everyone to keep their eyes out for both the diversity and inclusion issue that Reuters has done, the sustainable brands, Trailblazing Women. Fascinating and amazing. And I think next year we'll do a circle up and we'll see who's on next year's list.
Excellent. Okay. Look forward to that.
Well, thank you
Thanks
so
very much, Kate. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for listening. May this episode inspire you to move forward. Be sure to go to iTunes, Spotify, katebyrne.co, that's KATEBYRNE.co, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and listen to even more episodes. Here's to strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them. And be sure to meet them on the next Women Advancing. Ta till next time.